My father stole my college fund for his mistress. Now he pays me rent in what was his house, and found out his own father disinherited him to give it to me. I'm 33 years old. I work in tech consulting, and I need to get this story off my chest because basically my father is the most manipulative and lying person I've ever met in my life. And what happened like a year and a half ago still has me processing everything. The thing is, I always knew my father wasn't exactly the best dad in the world, but I never imagined to what extent he was capable of lying and stealing, literally stealing, from his own family. I guess I should start from the beginning. When my parents got divorced, and I was like 10 years old, because that's where everything started going to hell. My parents never had a good marriage. I mean, I was a kid, but even I could tell things weren't right. My father, Gregory, worked a lot, but when he was home, he basically ignored my mother, Carol, and me. And the worst part is that when they fought, I always ended up being the messenger between them. Like, my mom would tell me, "Tell your father I need money for groceries," and my dad would tell me, "Tell your mother to leave me alone." And there I was in the middle at 8 or 9 years old, not understanding why they couldn't just talk to each other like normal adults. And when they finally got divorced, I honestly felt more relief than sadness, you know? Because at least I didn't have to be carrying messages back and forth all the time anymore. After the divorce, I lived mainly with my mom, and Gregory paid child support but almost never saw me. He was supposed to pick me up every 2 weeks, but like half the time he'd cancel last minute with work excuses. My mom never talked bad about him in front of me, which now that I think about it was very mature of her, but I could see she was tired from working double shifts to compensate when my father was late with payments. I spent a lot of time at my paternal grandparents' house too, Frederick and Lillian, and they were great with me, like they kind of made up for my father's absence. When I was 15, my father got remarried to a woman named Sandra, who was actually pretty nice. She had a daughter my age, Madison, and at first I thought it was going to be super weird, but we ended up getting along well. Sandra tried to include me in family stuff and all that, and I appreciated the effort, but it's not like I spent much time at my father's house anyway. What I do remember is that my father suddenly started acting like he was father of the year, like taking Madison and me to baseball games and stuff, as if he was trying to impress Sandra by showing her what a good dad he was. It was kind of pathetic, to be honest. A couple years later, my half-sister Abigail was born, and when that happened, I basically stopped existing for my father. I mean, he had this perfect new family with his wife and his 2 daughters, and I was like the awkward reminder of his previous marriage. By the time I turned 18 and was about to start college, that's where things got really bad. Turns out for years, my father had promised me he was going to pay for my college, that he had a savings fund for that and not to worry. My mom also had some money saved, but it wasn't enough for a private university. So, I was counting on what my father said he had put away. Well, 2 months before starting the semester, my father tells me he's not going to be able to help me with college. Just like that. No more. I sat down with him at a Starbucks. I still remember that conversation perfectly. And he told me he'd had unexpected expenses with Abigail, that Sandra wasn't working full-time to take care of the baby, and that basically he needed that money for his new family. I asked him what happened to all those years he'd told me not to worry, that he had it covered, and he just shrugged and said things change, that I'd understand when I became a father. I was in shock, literally didn't know what to say. I ended up going to a state university with scholarships and student loans and working part-time throughout college. My mom helped me as much as she could, but it's not like she was swimming in money either. During those years, I practically didn't talk to my father. Like I realized his promises weren't worth anything and decided it was better not to depend on him for anything. I graduated, got a good job in consulting, and went on with my life. We talked maybe 3 or 4 times a year, on birthdays and Christmas basically, and that was it. Then, like 8 years ago, when I was 25, my father contacts me out of the blue. He calls me on a Saturday morning, and at first I thought something bad had happened because he never called me. But no, turns out he needed to ask me a favor, or rather ask me for money. He tells me, Madison is about to start college, and they're having financial problems, if I could help them with something. And I'm sitting there thinking, is he seriously asking me this after what he did to me? But he explained that Abigail had had a medical emergency when she was little, something with her heart, I think, and They'd had to use Madison's college fund to pay the hospital bills because insurance didn't cover everything. The thing is, Madison was always cool with me, and it didn't seem fair that she should suffer for our father's decisions. So I told him, yes, I could help with something, but only under one condition, that he tell Sandra the truth about what happened with Madison's money. Because from what I understood, Sandra didn't know that my father had used her daughter's college fund to pay for Abigail's medical bills. I thought it was fair, right? If I was going to put my money into this, at least everything should be transparent. My father got kind of weird about that. Like if it was really necessary to involve Sandra, that she was already stressed and he didn't want to worry her more. But I stood firm and told him. Either he told his wife the truth, or there was no deal. He finally agreed. Though I'm not sure if he actually did it, or just told me yes, so I'd loosen up the money. I ended up lending him like $15,000 over the next 2 years to help with Madison's college, and he always said he was going to pay me back, that he just needed time to stabilize financially. Fast forward like 5 years later, I was 30 and had been dating my now wife Parisa for 2 years. She's of Afghan descent. Her parents emigrated before she was born, and she's literally the most incredible person I've ever met. She's a doctor, works in pediatrics, and has this huge heart for helping people. We met at a medical technology conference. E was there for work, and basically fell in love immediately. After 2 years together, we decided to get engaged. And obviously, I had to tell my family. My mom's reaction was beautiful. She cried with happiness and welcomed Parisa like she was her own daughter. My grandparents were thrilled too. My father? Well, that's another story. When I introduced him to Parisa for the first time, he was polite but cold, and then when we announced the engagement, he basically told me he thought I was making a mistake. I asked him why, and he started with these vague excuses about cultural differences and if I'd thought carefully about the complications. I knew exactly what he was saying without saying it, and I made it clear that his opinion didn't matter to me, and I was going to marry Parisa with or without his blessing. What my father did next was one of the lowest things I've seen. At a family dinner at my grandparents' house, in front of everyone, he made comments about Parisa, like asking if she was going to want me to convert to her religion. She's not even particularly religious. And if we'd thought about how we were going to raise our kids with such different cultures. My grandfather Frederick shut him down right there, told him to stop acting like a bigoted idiot, but the damage was done. Parisa held it together through the whole dinner with a lot of class, but when we left, she cried in the car, and I was furious, like I never felt such rage toward my father. A few months before the wedding, I asked my father to pay me back the money I'd lent him for Madison because we needed that money for the wedding. It's not that we were tight, but $15,000 is a lot of money, and I thought after 5 years it was reasonable to ask for it back. You know what he told me? That he wasn't going to give it back because he didn't approve of my marriage and didn't want to finance something he disagreed with. I was literally speechless. Like I couldn't believe he'd said that seriously. I reminded him it wasn't a gift but a loan, that he'd promised to pay it back, and he just said I should see it as my contribution to my sister's well-being, that family helps each other. The hypocrisy made me nauseous. That's when I decided enough was enough. I was fed up with the lies, the broken promises, the barely disguised racism, everything. I sat down one night and wrote a long message, like 2 pages, detailing everything my father had done to me over the years, how he'd used me as a messenger when I was a kid, how he'd broken his promise about my college, how he'd asked to borrow money and now refused to pay it back because he didn't like my fiancé. I sent it to the whole family, Sandra, Madison, my grandparents, my mom, even some aunts and uncles. Basically, I aired all the shit my father had done over the years. The response was immediate and kind of chaotic. My mom called me and said she understood my frustration, but maybe it had been a bit extreme, though she admitted she didn't blame me. Madison wrote me thanking me for helping with her college and apologizing for her dad. But the biggest bomb came from my grandfather Frederick. He called me 2 days after the message and said we needed to talk in person. I went to his house that same day, thinking maybe he was going to scold me for causing family drama, but no. What Frederick told me changed everything. Turns out, Abigail's medical bills The ones that supposedly had forced my father to use Madison's college fund never existed. I mean, yes, the bills existed, but Frederick had paid them all, completely, at the time. My grandfather had the receipts, the bank statements, everything. My father had lied about using Madison's money for medical expenses. So, where had that money really gone? That was the question. My grandfather was furious, more furious than I'd ever seen him in my life. He told me he'd suspected for years that Gregory had problems with money, but had never had proof. And then he tells me, almost casually, that he's going to change his will. It turns out the house where my father lives, which I thought was his, is actually Frederick's property. My grandfather had bought it decades ago and had let Gregory live there all this time with the idea that eventually he'd inherit it. But now Frederick tells me he's going to transfer ownership of the house to my name as a wedding gift and that he's also going to take Gregory completely out of the will. I'm not going to lie. I was shocked. I told my grandfather it wasn't necessary, that he didn't have to do that for me, but he told me he wasn't just doing it for me, that he was fed up with his son being a liar and a bad father, and that this was as much a gift for me as it was a punishment for Gregory. He asked me if I had any problem with that, and honestly, after everything my father had done to me, I told him no, that if that was his decision, I respected it. Frederick announced it to the family like a week later, at another family dinner that I didn't attend but that I was told about afterwards. Apparently my father turned livid, started yelling that it wasn't fair, that they couldn't leave him without a house, and my grandfather simply told him he should have thought about that before being a shitty father. Those were his exact words, according to Madison, and my grandfather is like 75 years old. I'd never heard him say a curse word. Sandra was apparently confused and asking what was going on, and that's when everything came out about Madison's money that had never been used for medical bills. The following days, my father sent me like 20 emails and calls trying to contact me. He said it had been a mistake, that we needed to talk, that I didn't understand the full situation, basically begging me to intervene with my grandfather. I ignored everything. I'd already given him too many chances throughout my life and he'd always wasted them. I married Parisa a month later in a beautiful ceremony, and my father obviously wasn't invited. I blocked his number and we went on our honeymoon to Greece for 2 weeks, completely disconnected from all the family drama. When we got back, Sandra contacted me asking if we could meet. I agreed because she'd always been good to me and I had nothing against her. We met at a cafe, and that's where she told me the rest of the story. The missing part, turns out after everything, exploded. She'd started looking at the family finances more closely, something my father had never let her do. Giant red flag. I know. And she discovered that Gregory had been having an affair for the past 3 years. The large withdrawals of money that she thought were for Abigail's medical emergencies or for Madison's college fund had actually gone to pay for his mistress's apartment and vacations with her. I sat there listening to Sandra tell me all this and honestly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The audacity of this man. Literally, the audacity. He'd stolen his stepdaughter's college future, he'd stolen from me, he'd cheated on his wife, and all for what? To support a mistress? Sandra told me she'd filed divorce papers that same morning and was going to move in with her parents along with the girls. I asked her if she needed help with anything and she said no. That her family was supporting her, but that she wanted me to know the full truth. After Sandra moved out of the plane and house, which technically was now my house, my father stayed living there alone. I sent him a letter through a lawyer, informing him that now that the property was in my name, I was going to start charging him rent. Nothing exorbitant, just the fair market price for a house that size in that area. If he wanted to stay, he'd have to pay like any other tenant. My lawyer told me I could technically evict him, but I decided not to. Not for him, but because I didn't want that level of drama. Besides, the idea of him having to pay me rent every month seemed like a kind of poetic justice. Gregory tried to fight this legally but had no basis. The house was in my grandfather's name and he had every right to transfer it to whoever he wanted. Eventually, my father accepted the rent agreement because he didn't have many options. Every month I received the payment, almost always late, and split the money between my mom, Carol, and Sandra. My mom at first didn't want to accept it, but I explained it was a way to compensate for all the money he'd owed her in back child support for years, and she finally agreed. Sandra uses her share for Madison's college fund, replacing what my father had stolen. Madison is now in her last year of college studying nursing and doing really well. We still talk regularly, and she has a good relationship with Parisa too. Abigail is 15 now, and Sandra says she knows the basics of what happened between her dad and the rest of the family. But they're trying to protect her from the uglier details until she's older. My relationship with my father is non-existent. I don't even know if that counts as a relationship. We haven't spoken directly in over a year. My mom asked me a few months ago if I'd ever forgive Gregory, and honestly, I don't know what to tell her. Part of me feels like there's not even anything to forgive. Because forgiving implies he did something wrong, but wants to make amends. And he's never really admitted he did anything wrong. He's never genuinely apologized for anything. The few times he tried it was with excuses like, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I'm sorry if I offended you." Those kind of non-apology apologies that don't mean anything. My grandfather told me I did the right thing maintaining my boundaries, that some people simply don't deserve to be in your life, no matter how much blood you share with them. Parisa and I are fine now. We live in a city like 3 hours from where my father lives, so there's no risk of casual encounters or anything. She never pressures me to fix things with him, says, it's my decision, and she supports me in whatever I decide. Sometimes I think about how things would have been if my father had been different, if he'd kept his promises, if he'd been honest even once in his life. But then I realize I can't live in the what-if world. I have to live in reality. And the reality is, my father is who he is. The ironic thing about all this is that in the end, my father lost everything he was supposedly protecting with his lies. He lost his wife. His relationship with his daughters was severely damaged. His own father disinherited him, and now he lives alone in a house he has to rent from me. His son, whom he betrayed multiple times. I don't feel satisfaction exactly. I'm not celebrating his downfall either, but I don't feel sorry for him either. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, as the saying goes. Last week, my grandfather Frederick called me to tell me he's proud of me, of how I handled the whole situation and the life I'm building with Parisa. Coming from him, that means a lot, because he's a man who doesn't give praise easily. He asked me if I thought I'd ever talk to my father again, and I told him the truth, that I didn't see it in the near future and maybe never. He said he understood perfectly, and that he hadn't talked to Gregory either since the day he announced the will change. It's sad, I guess, that a family disintegrates like this, but I also think you can't force relationships with people who consistently hurt you just because they share your last name. And that's enough for me for now.